Welcome, everyone. As you're joining, we will give everyone a minute to join here. Anders, I'm always so excited to have conversations with you. Can't wait for today's conversation, too.
Likewise, Amanda. It's
Yes.
always fun to catch up with old friends and new friends alike.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's always a good time.
Okay. So, Anders, thank you for the introduction. So, I'm Amanda Prochaska. I'm the Chief Wonder Officer and founder of Wonder Services. We are all about creating change within organizations, especially as you're going through a digital transformation. And Focal Point is one of our partners. We love working with them. So today is all about procurement's value and communicating that. So let's go ahead and flip to the first question, Maya. All right, so question number one, Anders, I'm going to be asking all the questions of you today. So you're on the hot seat, but I will chime in as we go to add my 2 cents into this too. So what are the key elements to include in a compelling business case for procurement initiatives?
So the answer to that question is that it really depends on what the organization is looking for procurement to achieve. And by that, I mean, it has changed so much over the years what procurement takes on and what they're responsible for, that it's different for each department. So when we started in procurement way back, it was all about saving money. And that was the only metric that we were really measured on. But now it's so much more than that. So now we need to mitigate risk. We need to make sure that corporate goals are met, such as diversity and inclusion, environmental sustainability, governance, cycle times, reduction in treasury, for example, and making sure that you manage your cash properly. So it has to be aligned with what the organization is trying to achieve, and those are the elements that typically are part of a business case. But there are so many things that we do that are never really measured or tracked that also need to be put to the forefront, such as customer satisfaction, such as mitigating risk. Like, how do you, for example, know about the disaster that you prevented by doing a proper due diligence on the supplier, right? So there are many, many things that should be included in a procurement business case that are not financially driven. And I would imagine you see some of the same things, Amanda.
Yeah, and one thing that I see often, Anders, is especially when people are building a business case around a technology investment, they get super focused on the technology, but forget about everything else that needs to happen to make that technology deployment effective and hopefully beneficial for the company. So what we like to tell people is that think about this holistically. So think about your people. Think about, hey, do you need to change your organization? Do you need to add skill sets? Is the data going to change? Are your metrics going to change? So the more comprehensive you can be, the better off it's going to go for the business case. And the reason why is when you walk in and you have that comprehensive picture, the decision maker is going to be like, you know your stuff, right? You've thought through this. It's not just a tech deployment. We need to make sure that this is successful. And so that's the number one thing that we tell people over and over and over again is that think about this holistically, and it can't just be about the tech.
And I will add to that too, right? Like, so if you give me a hammer, I can punch holes in walls. I cannot build a house, right? And the same thing is regarding certain procurement or tools, for example. You have P2P solution providers saying that you can save millions of dollars by implementing P2P. That might be true, right? But at the same time, by deploying P2P technology, limiting catalog, doing demand management, you're able to extract so much more benefits from the same tool because you're utilizing it to its full potential. So just slamming in a technology might not in and of it by itself save the organization money. So I think it's important to think about how you implement it as well.
I 100% agree with that. And I know we could dive into this topic and talk about it for the next 30 minutes, but just a quick comment on that. So often we see business cases that have huge numbers around a procure to pay solution, but the savings actually occurs when you do something with the information that you obtain from that P2P deployment. And that comes to sourcing and making sure you have the right talent, et cetera. There's a little itty bitty piece of maybe people efficiency that you can get from P2P, but the unlocking of the value really comes from the sourcing side. Very interesting. Okay, let's move on to question number 2.
So
So go
go ahead.
ahead, Anders. What
Go
are
ahead, read
some
the
of the
question.
common challenges when building a business case, and how can they be overcome?
Well, I think, we get so desensitized to seeing these huge business case numbers, right? Because if you buy what software providers or providers in general are telling you, they're saying, look, buy our solution and we will save you billions of dollars on a millions of dollars spend base, right? So I think part of the reason is we need to sort of centralize on what is a credible business case outcome, and also, backing those things up with how we're going to utilize the technology, how we're going to change behavior, and how we're going to actually govern the outcomes. And I think that those are the things that are often left out. And then without the backup material, it becomes a non-credible business case. And that is very often it. Like the numbers are just too good to believe, and then often they get discounted, completely out of hand.
Yeah. And for those who are putting together business cases right now for whatever you're trying to achieve, so often at least in the tech space, the tech providers want to give you the business case, which I always encourage looking at, even if you're going through a selection process, getting a business case from every single supplier that you're looking at. But at the end of the day, make your own presentation and put the story into it that's related to you. Make sure that you're comfortable with those numbers. And yes, you can use their presentations as a guideline, but so often, again, I see that these business cases are just reused and presented as their own, but the story fails. And so often, Anders, what happens is that it doesn't resonate with the other person. So if you're going to a CFO might care about procurement, but really what they care about is what they are charged with as a CFO. So if you can talk in their language versus procurement speak, it goes over a lot more effectively. So knowing what's important to your CFO or what's important to your key decision maker is a game changer when it comes to overcoming those challenges.
100%. You want to make sure you
Okay.
answer the questions that are actually being asked.
Yes, right. And tell a great story, right? That's relevant to the decision maker at the end of the day. All right. Let's go on to question number 3. All right. Can you provide examples of how to quantify the value of procurement initiatives for both short-term and long-term goals?
Absolutely. So what I sort of like to talk about is when we set up goals for the organization, whether that is saving money or reducing risk or increasing spend with diverse suppliers or decreasing carbon footprint. As procurement, those things all get accomplished in one of 3 ways, right? Number one is through selecting new suppliers, so making sure that these initiatives include all the aspects that you're trying to measure or trying to improve. Secondarily, it comes into play as you are managing your supplier base. So if you're trying to manage carbon footprint, for example, number one, you need to know how much carbon a specific supplier is emitting on your behalf based on what you're buying from them. And number two, you need to have a baseline for which you can then challenge the suppliers to work with you to decrease that. And number three is how when you buy stuff from the supplier, when you transact, so whether it's a procure to pay or through P-card initiatives, whatever the case may be. So all these three functions are basically how you put your strategies to life and how you execute on those strategies. And it's important that all the initiatives and all the interaction that you have with your suppliers actually reflect the goals of the organization, both short-term and long-term, as you are executing those things. So as folks, for example, are implementing Focal Point to, for example, increase their spend with diverse suppliers, we make that diverse supplier tasks a required task in the project. We make sure that diverse enabled project or available projects actually have diverse suppliers included in them. And then we reduce the friction of searching for diverse suppliers by integrating whatever supplier diversity tools they have, such as supplier IO or other ones, so that you can basically do a quick search in a search bar. Diverse suppliers become available. You filter, and then you can drag and drop those suppliers into the project. So it's all about making it easy and making it available for folks to use.
I love that. So we're actually going through something with a client right now, Anders, where they've invested in a technology and we're asking them, what does success look like at the end of the day? And you would think that that would be a very simple question and answer, but it has been 3 months, 3.5 months that we've been talking about it. Okay. So when you are building a business case, I highly encourage everyone to think about, what does success look like at the end of the day? And that is not just financial metrics. And it's not also immediately after the implementation. So when you think about what does success look like, I just had this conversation with another client, and they're putting in a supplier onboarding tool, and they want touchless vendor onboarding, which means nobody in AP needs to interact with that master data to get it into the system of record, which is their ERP. That is their ultimate success criteria. So I think when we're looking at the value and how you can put that together, the best advice that I can give you is really hone in on what does success look like, and then have a measure around it. And then sometimes, like this one client where it's taking three months to figure this out, it's a short term, like, what are we expecting at go live? So we have metrics around that, but then also longer term, what does success look like? Because some of these things lag, right? You have to get the process up and running. You have to do the sourcing. You have to do whatever to be able to get to those longer term goals. So great question to ask yourselves. It's a lot harder than you would think, but highly encouraged to do that at the business case level. So when you get into project execution, everyone's aligned and you can be off to the races.
Very good.
Okay. All right. Number 4, and please, those in the audience, we have a handful of you guys, 15 of you in the audience. We would love to have your questions too, so we can make this interactive. So as you're thinking about what you're trying to achieve, if we're not covering something on your mind, please put it in the chat. We would love to hear from you. Okay, question number 4. What are some effective strategies for presenting a procurement business case to executive leadership to gain their buy-in? And I've already hit on my hot point, but Anders, you answer this first.
I mean, I think you have to speak to the audience that's in front of you and touch the things that are relevant to them. So as, take any technology, whether that is, a P2P or a contract management solution or a focal point for that matter, you have to create the picture of what the future looks like for the stakeholders and the benefits they're going to get out of it, soft and hard benefits. In addition to that, telling a good story about the existing problem that you have and why a solution will fix it is also very good. Like, don't just jump to the solution. You have to really quantify the problem and why it needs to be fixed, right? Just because you know it doesn't mean that they know it, because they don't have to worry about it. They don't have to deal with your problems every day. You do. So it's important that you talk to them directly, but also to their stakeholders and their clients as well.
Great. So I already mentioned the whole speak their language thing earlier on, but there's a couple of other things that I would like to point out here. First of all, be the guide, not the hero in your business case. And I know that's kind of a nuanced thing, but think Yoda versus Luke Skywalker. Okay, for a Star Wars. Hey, Anders, you approved of that Star Wars reference right here. So you want to be that guide and make other people in the organization the hero. It comes off so much more effectively in your presentation. You could make the CFO or the decision maker the hero. Like, what is this going to do for them to be successful in their role? And you are the Yoda to help make that happen. The other thing that people do, and they fail almost every time when they do this, is they paint a rosy picture. All right. And I think software salespeople encourage that so much, to the point where sometimes it makes me very uncomfortable. Like this implementation is going to take 10 weeks and there's nothing that's going to go wrong, which is not the case. So when you go in and you build your business case and you have this conversation with executive leadership, talk about the work it's going to take to get there or the risks that you already can perceive. Be as real as possible, because that will get conversation going. It will help set you up for success when you get to yes. So make sure that you're being real about how you're communicating that. The last thing that I will say about building a case for executive leadership is don't be the only person in the room talking about this, right? So if you have an executive leader that you know is the decision maker, who else can you get involved that influences that decision maker? Who has a relationship with that person? Who can maybe talk to the CFO before you get into the room to help support the initiative? Work your network to your advantage, and it will go off much more effectively with that executive and that decision maker. Okay.
Very good.
Those are,
Very good point.
so and I'm only saying this because I've failed miserably so many times at business cases that I've learned the hard way. So I wish I would have done some of this early on in my career. All right, moving on to question number 5. What are some of the most common objections that procurement faces when advocating for their department's needs? And we see this a lot, Anders, I'm sure you do with the work that you do.
Yeah, I mean, the number one really objection is that, is this really necessary, right? We have so many competing priorities in organizations, and typically the customer facing and revenue generating departments, organizations tend to get the first, second, and third dollar, and maybe procurement gets the fifth or sixth at some point in time. But it's really about, advocating in a way that says, like, this also will help profitability, and making sure that folk understand just how proliferating procurement really is in an entire organization from end to end. So typically, what people will say is, well, don't you already have a tool that does that? Right? So I'm not going to point fingers, but some source to pay suites providers will tell you that they do everything. But of course, they don't really, right? They have a form that you can fill out to request something, but that's not a workflow, that's a form, right? So I think there's lots of things that people will say, well, we thought we already bought that. And maybe you did think you bought that before, but it is centralizing on what is the reality, and then figuring out how to move forward from there. And what I often also find too, certainly for talent, is if you have really good procurement talent, they get snapped up by the business in a heartbeat. And that is tough sometimes as well.
Yeah, I think I was thinking about this because there's just so many, depending on the culture and what's going on within an organization, where you could have objections. I think the most common ones that I come across, as you mentioned, Anders, is, don't we already have a system that does that? Where does this fall in the priority of things? Or we need to wait because we're doing a S/4HANA upgrade or an ERP implementation that's 5 years from now, but we're going to stop everything until we can get to that. But I do also understand that there is a challenge when it comes to decision making around the talent on your team, and if you have the right people to pull off a successful implementation. I do hear that quite often too.
Yep.
So, but I think the best thing that you can do as you're preparing yourself for these conversations is think about all of the objections in advance. Like, what are those decision makers going to ask of you? What are they going to try to push forward in their questioning, and have an answer for those.
Yeah.
The more prepared you can be in that sense, I think the better. It's just like any good salesperson, right? You have objections that you already know that people are going to say, and you already build that almost into your presentation in advance so you can answer those questions before they're asked.
And here's another thing that I often see, right? There's two variations of this, right? So let's say that you have a ERP tool that that offers a procurement solution, right? It's typically not fit for purpose. It's typically not best of breed, and it's typically not a good user experience, right? But for all the right reasons, this gets thrust upon you, and you basically are forced to use whatever solution is available in the ERP suite, or whether that is Oracle or SAP or anyone else for that matter, right? This very often procurement gets forced into using a solution that is not really optimal. Then because of the ERP solution. The second one is, IT makes huge investments in technologies like ServiceNow. I'm going to pick on them, right? And
Yeah.
try to bastardize existing solutions to the nth degree before they will actually go and build a fit for purpose solution, right? So basically, if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, and they will try to MacGyver whatever they have into meeting your requirements. And typically, what I've seen, it doesn't always end very well. And you waste a whole lot of time and effort and resources trying to make something fit when it was never meant to do it.
Right. And there's a speed to value there too, that like if you have something that's fit for purpose, you can get that deployed much more quickly and effectively than something that is custom made because you have an existing technology that can somewhat meet the needs. Usually what happens, at least in my experience, is it takes a lot longer to deploy and a lot longer to get to the point where you're stable in your operations of the use of that technology. So there's a couple of other factors to consider there. Great points, Anders. Okay, let's go on to question number 6. How can procurement effectively communicate its value in meeting non-financial goals?
Yeah, and I really like this question because I think we in procurement now get measured on so many different things other than just savings or financial goals. And I think we need to do a better job of advocating for ourselves and really communicating effectively all the things that we are doing for the business to achieve their corporate goals. So as you now are putting out your benefits trackers and your dashboards and your category overviews and all those kinds of things, make sure that you can actually communicate the baseline of carbon emissions, your baseline of plastics, your baseline of ESG, of diversity and inclusion goals, and then how you have moved the bar in the last quarter or month or whatever time period you're reporting on. Because most often, those metrics are not on your dashboards at all that are customer facing, because you keep reporting financial benefits, but really you do so much more than that. So I think the number one thing is start reporting on it. That way, at least people will pay attention to it. Maybe not pay attention, but at least they will see it. And slowly but surely, they will get ESG or diversity goals as well. And then you can show them how you can help them meet those goals.
Yeah, there's a lot to be said on this this question. I'm trying to figure out where to start. But I think there's something about developing a bigger and broader story for procurement. So when you go in for a specific ask, people already know the broader story. And that broader story includes not only your savings, but I would say value that you're driving for the company. And great leaders in procurement today are sharing that story on a very, very regular basis to their stakeholders, to their decision makers. So people know the value that procurement is delivering. And then when you go in and you ask for a specific investment into your organization, you can tie your story back to the bigger picture. What I like to call it in our change management language, we put a bow on it, right? So you need to have not only your specific ask, but that broader story developed so that they know, the decision maker knows how this particular ask fits into the bigger picture. So it's very important. I cannot stress this enough. This is actually, I think, where a lot of procurement professionals fall down when it comes to getting investment, is that they have not done a great job of telling the broader story, and consistently doing that in front of their stakeholders and decision makers within the company. So think about the value that you can derive. It might be some of these on the screen, ESG, diversity, it might be broader than that, but think about your value proposition story and get in front of your stakeholders on a regular basis to give them updates. It's a game changer. All right, question number 7. And then we're more than happy to take some questions from the audience. We'll have ample time to do so. So how can interpersonal and relationship strategies help when communicating value and negotiating with business stakeholders?
So this is a great question, because I think procurement folks, or some procurement folks, tend to underestimate the value of having procurement as a brand, to be able to communicate with your stakeholders, giving them regular updates, and actually being on a first name basis with decision makers and their lieutenants as well. And I think, people always want to know what's in it for them, right? And being able to communicate that on a regular basis and showing them how you're helping them in a day-to-day basis will strengthen that relationship and will make it easier for you to get invited to the dance earlier, or maybe sharing in joint outcomes and making sure that everyone's aligned. But at the end of the day, if you don't have a good brand of procurement within the organization, getting that funding and getting that business case approved is going to be much harder, right? Unless, of course, you're trying to say, give me this money and I will make it easy to deal with procurement. But if you haven't done it easy, if you haven't made it easy before, you're probably not going to be able to make that sing and dance, right?
Yeah. So something comes to mind on this, and I was taught this a long time ago, and I know I've talked a lot about it on LinkedIn over time, but it's this concept of PI, and it's performance, image, and exposure. And I was taught this a while ago, and I put my whole development plan around that for myself and my team. And what it means is that to build an interpersonal relationship with your stakeholders, with your suppliers, or whoever you're trying to build that relationship with, you have to be consistent in your performance. That's like your entry level pass for that relationship. Be reliable and consistent in your performance. An image means, what do people think of when they hear your name and you're not in the room, right? What's your image as a procurement professional? What is your image as a procurement organization? And if you think that it is great, go ask some people. If you think it's not so great, go work on it, right? So that's my suggestion there. And then exposure is meet more people, right? Just make an effort to meet more people. We had a head of engineering who actually was the person that taught me about PI. He wore a pink shirt every day, and he went and sat with someone new in the cafeteria every single day just to meet more people. Didn't matter who they were, he would just sit down and start chatting with them. So if you can have more people who know about your value personally and then know about your value as a procurement organization, it's going to help that entire picture. So think about PI when you're developing those relationships. It is a way to quickly shape and build those trusted relationships within an organization. So with that said, Anders, any closing thoughts? And then as we're doing that, if you guys have questions about something we didn't cover today, we would love to answer any questions that are on your mind. And with that, any closing thoughts, Anders?
Yeah, I mean, building business case for procurement investment or even attention is hard. It's more of an art than a science, right? And you really have to tailor it to your existing situation and what your stakeholders care about. So yes, if someone says here's our greatest ROI calculator and think that's it in terms of selling a business case, it is not, right? So I think you have to win both hearts and minds of your stakeholders and your executive team. And so that's why, it is a bit more of an art than a science. And what worked before is not going to work next time necessarily.
Yeah. My closing thoughts, and I agree with you wholeheartedly on that, is kind of twofold. One, there's power in creating an emotional reaction to what you are trying to present. So if you can think about telling a story where there's detail, you're using the senses, you're creating kind of this emotional reaction to your presentation. Hopefully it's not anger. Could be anger, you can leverage that. But think about the way that you're trying to create that emotional reaction. It's really what sells at the end of the day if someone emotionally connects with what you're saying. The other thing is there are a ton of horrible salespeople out there, but there also are a handful of really great salespeople that you guys can learn from. So if you have a great salesperson that you've built a relationship with at one of your suppliers, I would highly encourage to send over the presentation to them. They sell every single day. And if they're good, they'll have advice for you that maybe we didn't share today, or other ways to craft your message. So I highly encourage you, leverage your network, find those good salespeople and run something by them, so that you can get their wonderful ideas at the end of the day. All right. Well, Anders, we must have answered all of the questions today.
Yeah.
So we do not have any questions in the chat, but I so appreciate your time today and your insights. I know you have these conversations with your clients. You've experienced it in your procurement career, as have I. So super important topic for everyone. And feel free for those that are either watching today or are watching the replay to reach out to either Anders or myself if you have additional questions. We would love to see you be successful in your initiative. So thank you so much for joining today.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great